Check. How's everybody doing tonight? Hey, I think you might need to turn me down a little bit. We're going to get excited here shortly. Daggone, man. I'm afraid to have this thing strapped too close to my mouth. I'll turn this place into a heavy metal concert. I'll be screaming here in a minute once God gets a hold of me. My name's Rich Walters. I'm a recovered alcoholic and drug addict. Thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. My sobriety date's April 28th, 2014, and for that I'm forever grateful. I say my sobriety date not to separate myself from anybody in the room who's in their first couple of days of sobriety, but to show them that this program works and that if you live a life according to God's will and you wake up to the best of your ability and die out each day and try to be the best human being that you could possibly be under the circumstances, that I believe that anybody and everybody can be set free from almost any problem in their life and can literally like turn a community upside down and change lives of people all around them. And I believe that with everything in me, that we are all capable of that. He said that the thing that's special about me is that God lives in me, but in order for God to live in me, I have to go through a season of absolute brokenness that most people don't want to ever face, endure, or anything else. And I had to get to a place where God had stripped me of all my pride, arrogance, ego, and everything else. And so I had no choice but to get on my knees and cry out for help. And it was the last thing that I ever tried. And it was the first thing that worked. And not only did it work, but it absolutely catapulted my life into a dimension that I can't even explain. And the life that I live today is unbelievably radical. And it's all because of God. This past weekend, my wife and I spoke at the 42nd Annual Jackson's Mill Roundup, which is an Alcoholics Anonymous convention in the middle of the state. There were several hundred people there. It was an amazing time, just a soul-filling experience, being around thousands of years of sobriety between all the people. And we're having the sobriety countdown, and there's people in the crowd with 50 years sober and all this other stuff. It's just such a beautiful place, and to be able to share that stage with men and women who are like this is such a humbling experience and such an honor to think that 8.5 short years ago, I literally was bound, that my story held me in bondage because I was so embarrassed of what I'd become. I used to be so embarrassed of this story. Thank you so much. I already guzzled the other one, so I got a problem with guzzling drinks. You'll hear about that shortly. It's terrible. I don't lose my humor because let me tell you something. I know where I came from. And I tell you, I'm also a firm believer that if you can't laugh about it, it still owns you. It don't own me anymore. I made peace with it, and I'm on the other side of it, and I've helped a lot of people try to get on the other side of it as well. But what an honor to be able to go there this weekend with my wife. I get to live a life today with a woman who gets to share the same passion and energy that I get to have and speak in front of hundreds and hundreds of people at a beautiful place in the middle of nowhere about God and what He's done to us and what He's done for us and everything else. I never would have dreamt that 8.5 years ago when I was so shameful of the story that I'm standing here telling you tonight. I was held in bondage, captivity, guilt, shame, remorse, all those things at what I'd become. I never dreamt in a million years that God would use the same story to put me in front of the masses and have me speak all over the United States and do the things that I've been able to do over the course of the past 8.5 years. I said that we got to speak this weekend. What I didn't get to mention is that we've literally spoken hundreds of times over the past 8.5 years. Or I have. And I've been asked to speak in front of all kinds of different crowds, alcoholics, drug addicts, ministers, law enforcement. Who would ever think that? I'm a guy with a criminal record. I never dreamt in a million years that the cops would ask me to come and try to explain to them what drug addiction is, what that looks like, how does alcoholism affect people, why is it that people can't stop. What they don't understand, what most people don't understand from the outside looking in, when you see somebody who keeps going back to it, it's not because they want to go party. The party's over. The lights are out. Believe me when I tell you, the lights were out and the party was over long before I stopped. I was doing something against my will, and I just kept going back to it on autopilot over and over and over and over again. And then I believe that God gives us all a moment of clarity or a cross in the road where, and He's given me several, but He allows us to make a sane, sound decision. And He gives us chance after chance after chance after chance to get well. And how many times do we slap the hand of God away and say, no, I'm going to go ahead and do it my own way? How many times? And unfortunately, what we see today is a lot of people out there on the streets who are dying as a result of this type of thinking. And it's very unfortunate. We also live in a time period where people are being robbed of their bottom. See, I was allowed to have the gift of desperation. Desperation, the gift of hopelessness, that's a gift. And only the people who's lived through that can understand what I'm talking about. See, I would have never come to know God the way I know God without that gift of desperation. Why would I? If I can get through life and handle life on my own terms, why would I ever need God? It wasn't until I had failed all my human resources, my will, and everything about me was crushed to a self-imposed crisis that I cried out and said, God, please help me. And it was no beautiful, it was no just poetic prayer. It was nothing beautiful. It was ugly. It was snot. It was tears. It was crying out, God, please help me. Because that's all I had left was that prayer. And it was in that moment that God met me and gave me just enough power to go on one more day. And the next day I do the same thing. And the next day I do the same thing. And the next day I do the same thing. And the next day I might do it 50 times. And the next day I might do it 75 times. Because I can be a mess. I can be a mess today if I get away from that life. But I just wanted to share my gratitude and how thankful I am before I get into my story about the life that I get to live today. And I can tell you that as I'm a product of God's grace, number one, and good sponsorship, number two. See, when I came in here, I had a sponsor who was very, very rough on me. He used to hurt my feelings all the time. I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, he would beat me down. He would tell me the truth about myself when I didn't want to hear it. And I think that's so important because one of the things that differentiates the church from the 12 steps, obviously, is sponsorship and discipleship. But see, in the 12 steps, when we're taught to carry the message, they tell us that our life depends on it. If you don't carry this message, you get outside of yourself and stop being selfish and self-centered, you'll probably go back to what you was doing prior to getting here, and guess what? It's going to kill you. But what if we told churchgoers the same thing? If you don't go out and start discipling people, you're going to die. I wonder what they would do then. You got to put a sense of urgency behind it. And so that now that I know that my life depends on me carrying this message, I get involved and I do it all the time. And so what happens is a lot of the times you'll see people come on church, they sit on a pew, they do a great job, they pray, they have a radical experience at church, and they take that feeling, they take that experience back home, and they sit on it until next Sunday. That is the most selfish act a human being could possibly do. That is the most selfish and self-centered thing that a human being could possibly do. One of the other things that I noticed that we do inside of the 12 steps that the church struggles to do, and I'm not taking the church's inventory. This isn't your church or my church or anybody. This is just the church. And I think that we see good results, and we see groups of young people that are overcoming fentanyl and meth and all these other things, and a life of just that's just terrible and flipped upside down. And they turn their life around and they go outside and they just become spiritual dynamos. And then we see people that are in the church that'll sit there 40 years and never get involved. And it's wrong. It's shameful. And I think one of the other things that we do is that we gather people in and we have what are called big book studies. And I don't go anywhere without the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And when you guys read the steps here, listen, I don't care what 12-step program you work, but just please work one. Because what it is, it allows me to gain access, to clear away the debris that's in my life, to gain access to this power that I call God. And I can access that power in its entirety each and every single day. And then I get to go out and carry this beautiful, loving message of love, tolerance, and service everywhere that I go. But what if the church had Bible studies the same way we have big book studies? 7 days a week. And they had a pot of coffee, and everyone was sitting around and chopping it up, and they're being real with one another, and they're talking about the stupid stuff like me talking about guzzling water. Because another thing is take the veil off now that we're in the church. Don't be afraid to be transparent. What brought you here? I'm not going to judge you. Don't worry about it. Be real with me. Tell me what got you here. And then what happens if we go inside of the church and we start to have Bible studies the same way that we have big book studies? And we sat down and we read the Bible line by line. And then we discuss on what we read. And we go through with a highlighter and a pen, and we go through and we mark this thing up like crazy. You mark your Bible up like crazy. What happens in the church if you start running a church like that? What happens when you start having workshops where you break down the books in the Bible, like we do in the 12 steps, and then you have a chili cook-off involved with that and everything else. And it's just cool fellowship, but you're sitting around, you're ripping this thing apart, and you're doing a workshop on every book in the Bible. And it might take 2 or 3 days, or maybe it takes a whole month to get through it, but by the time it's done, this thing right here, an unused Bible, is marked up, inked up, highlighted up, and everybody's changed, and now they can start to understand what it is more. People can't come in and pick the Bible up and just fully understand it. They can't do it. It has to be brought to life by them, by someone who knows it. And so that falls on the hands of the elders in the church. Just like it falls in the hands of the old timers and Alcoholics Anonymous and all the other fellowships out there. And when you have a culture and environment like that, it becomes, and I don't even know why I've gotten off on this. I just felt the need to share this, and I was prayed up heavily before I got here, so I must be needing to share this for somebody tonight. What happens to the church once you get that type of culture in it, you start to change things there. But I'm a product of good sponsorship, and I had a guy that wasn't afraid to read my mail, and he told me off all the time. I'm serious. He used to hurt my feelings bad. He said stuff to me that I still remember today. Now, that's 8.5 years ago, dude. I'm a sensitive guy. I'd never tell you how sensitive I am. But he used to hurt my feelings. And I had a sponsor who would read my mail and tell me that I was selfish, self-centered, that I was full of pride, I was full of ego, I was full of arrogance, and all these other things. And he would help me identify these things, and he'd help me work on them so I'd be less of me and more of him. And through that process, I've been able to radically change over the years. But that guy died with 28 years sober. And so I've been lucky and fortunate enough to be around good people inside of the fellowship and just about everywhere that I've ended up. And I think that's very important as well. I said it last night at a meeting when I was sitting down. I said, look around you. Who are you with? Who are you with tonight? Are you with someone who's taking you closer to God? Are you with someone who's begging you to be honest? Be honest at all costs. Who's pointing you to God every time you come to him with a problem? Who doesn't engage in gossip? They don't want to hear about rumors and gossip and all these other they shut it down. Or are you with someone who's dragging you further and further away from God? Who's urging you to be dishonest? Who wants you to gossip? Who wants you to get in the rumor mill? And who wants to just pull you slowly but surely away from the goodness of God? Only you know who you're with. And I don't mean to put anyone on the spot, but I did that last night at a meeting because I want people to go look, inventory your life. Who's around me? Who's pouring into me? Who do I hang out with? Who am I? Because I'm really who I hang around with. And so all that stuff is important. And I tell you, I had a lot of good influences in this fellowship. And I didn't come in here. I grew up a Catholic, okay? So when I got sober, I didn't know anything. I just didn't want anything to do with the church or anything else. And so let me tell you something. For 4 years, I was adamant, I'm never stepping foot in a church. This is what I did when I first got sober. I'm not going to do it. I don't believe in what they do. Those people are full of crap. They're judgmental, this, that, and the other. I don't want nothing to do with them. They're all hypocrites, this, that, and the other. And I'm taking their inventory. It's so silly. You know how it is. We've all been there. We've all done it. Maybe not all of you, but I did. And I walked through sobriety the first 4 years, and I carried this message as much as I possibly could. And I helped as many people, sponsored as many people as I possibly could, and I did all those things. And at 4 years sober, I hit a brick wall. And I've been praying to God, but I hadn't come to know Jesus yet. I've been praying to God, and so I just disregarded him. It's like my whole thought process was, I'm going straight to God. I don't need Jesus. And it's the way I thought, because I knew nothing about the Bible. I knew nothing about Christianity or anything else, but I'd imply to you that I did. And so it's like, I don't need a middleman. I don't need a middleman. And I'd say all these things and all this stuff, and life slapped me around at 4 years sober. And at 4 years sober, I found myself absolutely upside down, literally ready to just check out. Didn't know which way to go. My life was in turmoil. Going through severe tragedy in my life like you'd never seen. And I had hit a brick wall. I'd went as far as I could with just this. And I found myself at 4.5 years sober at a church altar. I'll never forget it as long as I live. My friend Justin told me the experience that he had when he was at church. And he had a similar experience, he had an experience just like me a couple of months before I did. And he said he was at the church and he didn't know what it was, and he had the same belief system that I did, and he's sitting there and life had beaten him up and slapped him around and broken him down, and he's sitting there and he's seeking and he's praying and he's lost in worship, and he says, I don't know what you are, but Jesus, is it you? I had the same experience at a church downtown, and when he told me that, it stuck in my head. And I'll never forget it. I was at an altar and I had 1,000,000 pounds on my back. And I was going through serious, serious tragedy and turmoil and chaos in my life. And I was at the altar and I remember him saying that he said that. And I said it out loud. Jesus, is it you? And I'll never forget it as long as I live. The Spirit of God moved on me so hard at that altar that night. And literally I could physically feel the weight being taken off of my body. Like someone had lifted 1,000-pound weight up off me. I could feel it. I could feel myself get light. I hadn't been able to cry for years. I felt that I was I felt that I was so callous to the point that I could barely shed any tears at 4 years sober. And then at 4 years sober, all of a sudden the waterworks just came on. And it was like years and years of pain and sadness and all that stuff. And all I did was cry out the same way he told me to cry out because I had no other choice left. And it was in that moment that I'd come to know Jesus. And that from that point forward, my wife would say, you're going to church with me every single Sunday. And when I met my wife, she didn't know a whole lot about this. So I took her to the rooms, and we got involved. I got her involved in the rooms. But when I met her, she took me to the church. And let me tell you something, it's changed my life radically forever from that point forward. But I tell you what, like I said, I've been around lots and lots of good people throughout my journey here, and I'm very, very thankful, and I'm very, very honored to be able to stand before you tonight. I'm the oldest of 4 kids. I have 3 younger sisters. All right, Mom and Dad are still together. I don't come from a broken home. Okay, but I got to tell you, there was a lot of turmoil, chaos, and sickness, and just. I don't want to share too much about it because we're on camera. There's just dysfunction. Let's say just dysfunction, okay? That took place at the house. And from the outside looking in, you probably wouldn't really expect that. I mean, you kind of expect it because my sisters are all nuts. And, and so ain't my mom. And, and so am I. But for the most part, things probably appeared to be okay. I played sports my whole life. My dad was my coach at all my sports. I was very good naturally at sports. I never had a problem getting along with people in school. A lot of times from the podium, what you'll hear people get up here and share is that I just didn't feel like I comfortable in my own skin. You hear people say this stuff. That wasn't my experience. I don't ever remember feeling that amongst my peers. Where I did feel that was standing right next to my dad and right next to my grandfather. And it wasn't because they made me feel that way. I used to look at them and think, those are real men. I'm never going to measure up to that. These guys right here are men's men. I ain't consistent enough. I ain't getting up every day and taking care of a family. I ain't getting up every day and working. I don't have it like them. So when I used to drink and get high, it would make me feel the way they looked. And anybody in here could understand that feeling. That once I get loaded enough, I'll suddenly start feeling the way my dad looks and the way my grandfather looks. And there's other people in this room who might be able to relate and identify with the things that I said. But that's the honest to God's truth. It lit me up and made me feel like I was a man. For once. At 13 years old, I picked up drugs and alcohol for the first time. I didn't have a great experience with it. Marcus was there. I can remember him vividly throwing up and saying, yuck. Every time the stuff expelled from his mouth, he would go, yuck, yuck. It was a nightmare for both of us. We wasn't like, this is great. Let's party forever. I felt a lot of guilt, shame, and remorse. I grew up in the 80s during the Just Say No campaign. All right, so I seen a lot of people. I was always told, just say no, to drugs and alcohol and everything else. So I didn't feel good about it. Plus, I knew that as soon as I had to get home, I'd have to face my mom. And facing my mom at the front door is a different story. I'm dead serious. She wears the pants in that family. I'm dead serious. My mom, dude, she's the type of mom. She's the type of mom that will make you go and fight the sixth grader who's picking up on you, and then go and call him a bunch of names as you're sitting there, and you're in second or third grade, and she takes you over there, and she's like, you're going to go, bleepity, bleepity, bleep, and you're sitting there like, oh my God, this is embarrassing. That's my mom. So when I tell you that I'm seventh grade, show up to the door, she's like, blow your breath in my face. And I'm just like, gosh. Can I get through the door? And I mean, dude, she'd be on me so hard. And so I knew that was coming. And believe me when I tell you, getting loaded wasn't excited when you knew that's waiting on you. It didn't take me long to find my friends' parents who weren't so much like my mom and dad. They said you could come over on Friday and just essentially stay blasted all the way through the weekend. And they'd basically cover for us. Now I loved it because I knew I wasn't going to get caught. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the way it made me feel early on. And so quickly in junior high, I become a weekend warrior when it comes to the booze, and I start smoking weed every single day. And I start selling drugs in junior high as well. I start selling weed and everything else. By the time I get to 10th grade, I'm on hallucinogens, I'm a full-blown alcoholic, I'm selling a bunch of weed, I'm doing all these other things. I quit playing all other sports except football, and I don't even want to play it, but I'm doing it to appease my dad and my football coach and my grandfather. At this point in time, I'm just partying and partying and partying. And like I said, high school was a big party. I ended up being a pretty good natural football player. I ended up going through high school, and I had the opportunity to play, which we partied all through high school. We partied and fought. And partied and fought, and partied and fought. This was just normal in those days. At least I thought so. I had the opportunity to go play for West Virginia University football for the Mountaineers. So I went up there, and anybody who's ever been to Morgantown, anybody here been to Morgantown? Well, I spent 6 years there, you know what I'm saying? And I got a 4-year degree in general studies. All right. So I spent a lot of time in Morgantown, let me tell you something. And I had a lot of fun in those days. Because let me tell you something, partying wasn't always a drag. I had a lot of fun for a long time. At least that's what it seemed like. It's not fun in comparison to how I live now. But back then it was fun in comparison to what it became. And so I lived in Morgantown. Like I said, I spent 6 years there. And when I left with a general studies, bachelor's in general studies. I don't even know how I got that. I literally cheated and bribed all the way through school. Everybody, it was terrible. And I came to the realization, or at least I thought that Morgantown was the problem. And I came back here to Parkersburg, West Virginia, thinking that I'm leaving the problem in Morgantown. But I brought the problem with me back here in Morgantown, or back here to Parkersburg, and it just got worse and worse and worse. From there, my drug addiction just spiraled out of control, and it got worse. I became a speedballer, and so what I do is I got hooked on opiates back in 2004, and I was strung out on cocaine, and I was a full-blown alcoholic. It didn't take long for the Vicodin opiates to turn into Oxycontin 80s and for the cocaine to turn into crack. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. April 18th, 2006, my Uncle Mike, who was one of my idols, one of my best friends, and a man that I looked up to who lived right next door to me my whole life, walked up in front of my grandfather and said, "I love you with all my heart, Dad," and he shot himself right in the head. It changed the course of my life forever, and it changed the course of my mom's life and just about everybody else who loved him. Except for me, I take someone's suicide because I'm so selfish and self-centered when I'm in the midst of addiction that I take someone else's suicide and I make it about me. So for a few years, I used my Uncle Mike's suicide as a pity party for me. I can't work, I need drugs, I need a girl, I need booze, tab me up, I need everything I can get, please, please, poor me, Uncle Mike killed himself. And I never fully allowed my Uncle Mike's death to be about my Uncle Mike. Or I could never be there for my grandfather or my mom or anybody else. It was always about me and poor me. And oh my gosh, I'm suffering and struggling badly because my uncle shot himself. My life spiraled completely out of control from that point forward. I didn't know how to deal with that stuff. Nobody ever taught me how to deal with that stuff. And the way I deal with it is I just get more and more drunk and more high. That's what I do. looking back, I was such a cold, lonely place to be. I don't know how I'm alive. My life continues to get worse and worse and worse. Sometime in about 2010, I stumble across the needle, and I don't tell anybody about it for about a year. Maybe 2011, I stumble across the needle, and I switch from crack cocaine, and I start to do other speed, like meth, and I start to order research chemicals from overseas. And really strong stuff, the stuff that's killing people today. All that stuff that you see, that stuff's all coming from overseas. And it's just really strong stuff. And so my life had just really taken a turn for the worse at this point in time. In September of 2011, I was busted with almost 400 grams of this dope and several guns. One of them had a serial number scratched off, everything, which is automatic 5 years in the feds. So I got arrested for it. They didn't even know how to charge me for it in the beginning because it was a research chemical and everything else. So they waited 3 months, and then they indicted me on a felony indictment. And they never did charge me with the guns, which I don't know why. And they tried me on this felony indictment with just the drugs. The first time I go through the court system on it, they dismiss it. So then another month later, they re-indict me on the same charge. So this is my second time through on this charge. We're getting ready to we're going through the trial period and everything, or we're going through all the court stuff that we're supposed to be doing up to this point. And one day the judge says to the prosecution, "I have no choice but to throw this out. The search warrant's no good." And the prosecution was sick to their stomach, believe me. And he said, "You could have found 10,000 dead bodies in his house. I'd have no choice but to throw this out because your search warrant's no good." You know what that does to someone like me who's arrogant and egotistical and selfish and self-centered? It makes me feel untouchable. So I walk out of that courtroom feeling untouchable that day. Well, it wasn't long that they hit me with a 10-count felony violence indictment, which I didn't do, oddly enough. And the guy had owed me money, and someone went in and just beat him and his wife up. And they charged me for it. I didn't do it. Right hand to God, I did not do it. I'd admit it to you today. They indicted me on it, and I went through the system on that, and then the same thing happened. Went through the cop, or they couldn't pursue the case because the cop who took the arrest report ended up with what's Michael J. Fox have? Parkinson's disease. So they laid him off. So he couldn't come and give testimony because they said that he had Parkinson's at that point in time. So then they wanted me so bad, they reinstated the cop that had Parkinson's disease and brought him back in so they could reindict me for it a second time. And by that time, we went in and we were getting ready to go to trial, and none of the witnesses showed up, so they had to throw it out, and they couldn't try me on it again. Now they've swung and missed twice. Now I really feel untouchable. And I went to court every single time absolutely loaded out of my mind. And my life's it's in the toilet at this point in time, guys. I'm covered in track marks. I'm 80 pounds underweight. I'm hanging out with the dirtiest people you've ever imagined in your entire life. These are the type of people that will put a bullet right in the back of your head. I don't care who you are, where you are, or anything else. They'll hit you with a hot shot or anything else. They'll fix you up proper if they don't like you. And these are the types of people that I'm around. And let me tell you something, I'm worse than most of them. And you get worse and worse and worse, and you start crossing off more and more lines as you go along. And so my life just continues to spiral out of control. And then in 2013, I was at my house, and 3 people dropped dead of an overdose in my living room, one after another. It was an odd occurrence. And I did not know what to do. First, one guy goes down. He goes down in my bedroom, and I can hear him grunting and screaming from the back room. I walk back. I take a look at him. I open my door. He's overdosing from speed. And I look at him, and he's sitting there, and his body's lunging up and down like this, and he's making this noise. And I'll never forget it as long as I live. I've seen people overdose on opiates and stuff like that, and what they generally do is just go to sleep. That's it. They go to sleep. That's it. Sometimes they might foam or whatever. And I don't mean to be graphic. I'm just being real. This guy, when you see someone overdose on speed, it's a completely different story. It appeared as if an exorcism was being performed on him. And he was laying face down, and his body was lunging up and down. And he was just screaming and just making this noise. And I looked at him, and I thought to myself, I can't believe you did this, dude. because that's tough luck on you. And I shut the door and just let him go. Because I'm not going to call 911 for you. They might do that stuff today. But 8.5 years ago, you're getting in trouble over that stuff. And 8.5 years ago, I had a ton of stolen stuff in my house and a bunch of things. And I knew the task force was coming, and I wasn't calling him there. Not to save him. So I walked away, and I went in a state of shock, and I just let him sit in there and seize out for a while. I go into my kitchen, and I don't know why, I make a pot of coffee. I'm not even going to drink coffee. I think I'm just in shock. I come back into my living room to talk to the girl that I've been talking to and my sister. And the first person I see is my sister laying on the ground doing the same thing. And now I go, I got a real problem. Now I don't have a choice. I got to call for help. I turn to the girl who I'm talking to at the time to say, what are we going to do? And she's doing the same thing. I don't even know what to think at this point. It's just a bad movie. I had already been up for a couple of weeks at this time. I'm a mess. What do you do in this situation? I couldn't muster enough strength to call 911 because I told you I won't call 911. I called my dad, the one person who every single time in my life he bailed me out. The one person who shows up at every single phone call. Every time I'm ever arrested, who do I call first? Every time I feel like something's about to go down at the hotel room, bring me a gun, do this, come pick me up, meet me out back, do this, told this, did this. And I abused my dad for years. I abused him. I abused my relationship with him, and I abused the love he had for me. And I called my dad because he's my guy in these situations. Dad, so-and-so's dying in the back bedroom. They've been back there for a while now. I didn't tell him about my sister yet. I didn't want him to have a heart attack on the phone. At that point in time, Marcus was staying down there with Mom and Dad, and my dad and Marcus just shot up to the house at 6:30 in the morning, and they couldn't get through the front door because I'd barricaded the house off because I was so paranoid. They had to come through the back of the house and get in there, and the first person my dad sees is my sister laying on the ground. I'll never forget it. My dad's a tough guy, man. He's just quiet. He's a blue-collar man of few words. He walks in, he screams, call 911. And I heard his voice crack. And I knew at that point in time I had broken my father. I broke him. I broke his spirit. I've finally broken this tough man. And this is who I am when I'm strung out. He taught me how to play sports. He taught me how to be honest. He taught me how to love. He taught me how to hunt and fish. He didn't teach me how to do this. This is who I become. And I broke my dad that day. They came in and got everyone out, and they had to transport us out the living room windows on stretchers because they couldn't breathe. They couldn't undo the door. And I ended up in Sharps Hospital, and all of them ended up in the ICU. I didn't know if they was going to live or die, nor did I even really think about it or even much care. I ended up in Sharps Mental Institution, and the only thing on my mind the whole single time was, I need to get out of here and get a shot of dope. That's it. I can't think of Mom or Dad or my sister or anyone else. I can think of me. That's who I become. And that's exactly what I did 14 days later when they finally let me out. And I'm thankful enough to say that everyone here, everyone survived that. But the one guy who was on the ground is in horrible shape today. And he's blind. His arm don't work. He's had multiple strokes. And I know that day really got him. It damaged him. I saw him one time about a year ago. I couldn't even believe it was him. He looked 100 years old. He's 50. This is who we are when we're out there. Not because we want to be. It's just who we become. If you let the drugs get you bad enough, You'll be a terrible human being. This goes on for another 18 months, and finally they catch me up in some more serious charges. This time I know they're going to stick. April 28, 2014, I ended up in Amity Treatment Center in Southside. And for the longest time, I didn't know how I got there. I thought God had placed me there. So this is how I don't remember. Most of my story is from other people telling me. And then I just tell you because I don't really remember. So April 28, 2014, I ended up in Amity Treatment Center. I literally believe that I'm taken there by the hand of God, right? I was like, I don't even know how I got there. I mean, I never called treatment or anything, dude. All of a sudden one day they're like, hey, you got a bed? And I was like, what? And I was like, I'll be right over. And I was like, it was all God. And so I told everybody the story for the longest time. And then I met my cousin about a year ago, and she was sitting there chopping it up with me and my wife. She's like, you were a total mess. You remember the day that I filled out your application for Amity Treatment Center and called you, got you the bed there? I was like, no, but I've been telling everybody it was God for the past 7 years. I'm glad you finally told me. Bring some clarity to that part of my life. I don't remember, because I did not know how I got there, because I'm not calling Amity Treatment Center or any other treatment center for that matter. I didn't have 30, 60, 90 days sober ever. I stayed high and drunk for 21 years, period. A wreck. I never had. One time I went to treatment in 2006. I was at Amity Treatment Center for 3 hours. This is how long I white knuckle it. I sat down at the table at Amity Treatment Center for 3 hours. I was like, this sucks, and left. That's as long as I can white knuckle it. 3 hours. You got 3 hours to make something radical happen for me, or I'm gone. That's how I party. April 28, 2014, I ended up in Amity Treatment Center, and let me tell you something. I was not cleansed. I was not saved. I was not well or anything else. I was a dirtbag walking right into Amity Treatment Center, and let me tell you, I walked in there, and on day 2, they had me on every single behavioral contract you could possibly imagine. Attempt to overthrow the Amity Center. I couldn't be 5 feet from women. Whatever. I hate even saying that on camera. Attempt to overthrow the Amity Center, monopolizing groups, splitting staff amongst each other, and all this other stuff. I mean, I went in there and just caused division amongst everybody, and then had them pitted against each other, and I was ready for war. That's all I knew was chaos. And so 26 days later, they finally got sick of me and they threw me out. While I was in Amity Treatment Center, I watched the guy who ended up becoming my sponsor, Richie Nova, speak at a meeting downtown. And this is why I'm so important. This is why I get caught up so much. This is why you hear that I've helped a lot of people and all these other things over the years, is because I'm real big on that, because the first guy that ever carried the message to me that night when I was 2 weeks in a treatment center. He stood up behind that podium down at Trinity Episcopal Church, and he carried a message that will make your toes curl. And that night I didn't even know what was going on. He rocked my world. But let me tell you something. The man stood up there and he needed a double organ transplant. I didn't know it. He still answered the call to duty, and he got up there and did what he was supposed to do and carried the same message that saved his life 28 years before. Little did I know he could barely even stand up. He was throwing up, and he needed 2 organs. He needed kidneys, and he needed maybe. I can't even remember, but it was 2 big organs. And it was bad. So he was in really, really bad shape, and he could barely even stand. And he was sick, and he was passing out and all these other things, but he got up there and he did what he does, and he carried the message. Daniel remembers him, and he was a good man. And he was a very, very good man, and he changed my life forever. The night that he got up there and spoke, I heard someone speak, and they say AA is like a giant toolbox. There's a wrench to fit every nut that walks through the door, and that night he was my wrench. And when he told my story that night, I walked away and I said, here's a guy who can finally reach me. He told my story, he told my truth. And so I submitted myself and I allowed him to sponsor me, and he did, and my life forever changed because of it. 26 days into treatment, they threw me out. For the first time in my life, I made a sane, sound decision. That day when I walked out of treatment, I had 2 options. Go do the same thing that I've done for 21 years, or make a phone call to this man that I saw speak. And for the first time in my life, I made a sane decision. Why? A sane thought at that point in time can't come from an insane person. God produces the same thought. God had intervened in my life, and here's that moment of clarity that I tell you about. Here's the crossroads that I tell you about, that suddenly I'm faced with, and I finally make the right, sane, sound, rational decision, and I call this man. That night they had me on my knees in a prayer circle over in Belpre, and I'm going through the first 3 steps. The next day I go through the rest of the 12 steps. I said, isn't this a little fast? Oh my gosh, the people in treatment are telling me I should take a long time. They said, no, this is exactly how they did it 80 years ago, and this is exactly how you're going to do it, or you won't stick around, because you are a trauma patient and you need power now. You need the power of God now. Why would we wait to get you to the power of God? Why would we wait 12 months to get you to the source? If you go into the emergency room with a bullet hole, they don't tell you to come back 12 months later for surgery. I was covered in bullet holes. I needed help. I was dying. Get me to the source. Get me to the power, which is God now. And that's exactly what they did. 8 months sober. I got indicted while I was in the Amity Treatment Center on a 3-count felony indictment on those charges I told you I knew they had me on. At 8 months sober, I had to show up for sentencing to those things. I had a suit on, I had a tie on, I was 8 months sober, I had 50 letters from people inside of Alcoholics Anonymous. My sponsor had came and spoke on my behalf. I walked into the courtroom. The prosecution did not want to give me alternative sentencing. They hated my guts. They wanted me to go to prison. They did not want me to have the opportunity to ever do anything else. Then I had one of the victims come in, and she painted a picture like I was Charles Manson. So I was like, I'm cooked. But I walked in there with my chin up and my chest out, and I had 50 letters from people, and I'd done everything in my power, and I had to allow God to do the rest. And I walked in there, and I'd done everything in my power up until that point. The rest is up to God. I'll never forget it as long as I live. When the sentencing came down, he said, I'm going to suspend this man. This is not the same man I've seen in this courtroom all these years before. Something's different about him. The same story that's inside of here. Something's different about him. Something's changed. Something's changed about him. You know what it was? It was God. Something had changed about me. He said, I'm suspending his prison sentence and I'm giving him 3 years of supervised probation. I almost fell out of my chair. I'll never forget it as long as I live. When I left that courtroom that day, I hit the ground running and I never looked back. Then shortly after that, we started the Fellowship of Heroin Anonymous, and it exploded. It's massive today. We was at the meeting last night. There's 150 people there. Just beautiful. Bunch of young heroin addicts carrying big books on fire for God. You can't beat that. You'll never see that anywhere else. 150 of them. Jam-packed. Let's have some fun. Let's talk about God. I hit the ground running and never looked back. We started that fellowship, then we started the memorial walk and everything else. I went through every trial and tribulation you could possibly imagine here since I've been sober. I have lost that I can't even... There's loss that I've endured since I've been here that I'm not going to tell the story to just to protect my kids. Severe stuff has happened to me and my family since I've been here. I've endured things that most people couldn't walk through, and I don't say that because I'm some tough guy. I say that because He is. He's sustained me through every low spot and every tough situation you could possibly imagine. At 2 years sober, I had the opportunity to work in treatment. No one around here had ever seen anything like this. There was only Amity Treatment Center. They had never seen anything like this, so they didn't understand what I was doing. And so I had the opportunity to work in treatment, and I hit the ground running. And let me tell you something. At that point in time, I could have went back to work in the oil and gas industry making 6 figures a year. But I went to work in treatment. I was making $325 a week after taxes and child support. I was working 80 hours a week, and it was the greatest job I'd ever had. Want to know why? I love helping people. Why? God did that. I ain't capable of doing that. I like taking. I'm a taker. Never will I be a person who gives back. God flipped my whole life around and changed everything about me and set me in motion that I can't stop. Let me tell you something. I couldn't stop doing what I'm doing today if I tried. Period. And no one else in this town, state, or this country could stop what I'm doing. I am in motion and I am trusting in God. And when He tells me it's time to stop, it's time to stop. But until that day comes, I'm going to keep going. I kept going and going and going. I met my wife at the second annual Walk Against Heroin. I ended up getting with her. A couple of years after that, we got married. I got my wife involved in treatment. We started working in treatment. And next thing you know, I'm a marketing director of a treatment center. Then I become the national marketing director of a treatment center. Then I become part owner of a treatment facility. Then I become part owners of 2 treatment facilities. Then I become full owner of a treatment facility here in Parkersburg, West Virginia. You can't script that. My wife's a 9-time felon. I'm a felon. Our lives are just nothing but felony papers, charges, and everything else. We're treatment center owners here in West Virginia. We have 240 clients at our center right now. We have 40 employees. You can't even imagine what God's going to do in your life. Let me tell you something. That don't make sense. make sense. And that's how I know it's all God. It don't make sense. God just keeps elevating us to glory, to glory, to glory, and he just keeps watching after us, and all we're doing is chopping wood and carrying water along the way. And let me tell you something, trials and low spots have came at every single corner, and things have happened. We went through so many bad things this past year, horrible things. God saw us through it and gave us the greatest year you'd ever seen in your life. The greatest year. I'm telling you, if you're going through something right now, keep trudging, keep trusting. I'm telling you right now that on the other side of this is a breakthrough so radical you just can't give up. There's a breakthrough coming that's so radical you can't fathom what God's going to do to you, with you, and for you on the other end of this thing. You just got to keep trusting the process, keep praying, and keep showing up. That's all I do is show up. God does the rest. But I got to report to life each and every single day. I got to report to this each and every single day. God will do the rest. But I got to show up. I got to show up. And I'm going to say this and I'm going to close. Let me tell you something. There's going to be a lot of people along the way that's going to tell you you ain't no good. That you're a no good piece of trash. You're always going to be that way. You're always going to be a liar. You're always going to be a bully. You're always going to be a thief. You're always going to be this. You're always going to be that. You're ever going to be you're going to be a deadbeat dad or a deadbeat mom, or you're going to be a hooker, or you're going to be this, or you're going to be whatever. They're going to shoot every single arrow when you're trying to clean your life up at you that they could possibly shoot to knock you off that. It is not what God says. Don't listen to none of that stuff. Keep your eyes focused on God and keep trudging every step of the way. At some point in time, you got to put blinders on and say, I'm going somewhere you ain't going. We ain't going to the same place. I'm going in this direction, and I ain't going to stop. At some point in time, you got to get some fight in your spirit and say, I ain't never looking back because I'm going to create some change. When I was a little kid, I had dreams. I had aspirations. I had big dreams. I wanted to do big things. And let me tell you something. I'll fight, claw, kick, everything that I have to in order to get all that stuff done. I'm never going to stop, and I'm never going to look back. And let me tell you, no one's opinion or anything else is ever going to deter me from getting there. You got to get the same fight and the same urgency in your spirit, because God is waiting for you to step into your calling. God is waiting for you to step up into your God-given purpose. He took you through, anyone who's been through serious trials, he took you through all that stuff because now he's going to light you on fire and make you a spiritual dynamo, and he's going to throw you loose, and you better go out there and set the world on fire. And if you don't, shame on you. Thanks for letting me share.